You're listening to Tara Lynn's A Geek Saga podcast. This episode features audio from a discussion panel that was recorded at DragonCon 2019. I'm going to get started while we're looking into this. I think it sounds like something's on, but again, I could just be loud. Thank you guys for coming out to Apocalyptic Psych. That is a mouthful. 101, coping with PTSD and other mental illnesses in literature. My name is...
Your name is... Well, that might be why it's off.
That's fine. We'll do without.
Turn it on.
No. Now they're definitely on. My name is Tara. I'm going to be the moderator. I am a podcaster, webcaster. Actually, Becca and I here do a Walking Dead webcast called I'm going to call it the Botching Dead right now because this is a family-friendly panel. That's not what it's really called. The Witching Dead, yeah. And I also am an author. One of my books is, if I could talk, one of my books is a zombie apocalypse novel. It's called How to Start Living in the Zombie Apocalypse. So, and my panelists here today are FT Lukens and Becca. You guys want to talk about yourselves a little bit?
Sure. Hi, I'm FT Lukens. I write young adults, sci-fi and urban fantasy. And in my day job, when I'm not an author or not at DragonCon, I work for the state of North Carolina. I work for, it's called a local management entity, and I work with individuals that have intellectual and developmental disabilities and co-occurring mental illness. So this is right in my wheelhouse, this panel.
Hi, I'm Becca. Like Tara said, I'm a webcaster on The Witching Dead. And so it was specifically for The Walking Dead and for The Walking Dead and everything else that will not end with that franchise. And I also write for an LGBT website called the Geek Saga. And I also struggle with mental illness and PTSD as well.
Yeah, I guess I didn't say anything about that, but I'm full disclosure, do have some experience with some of these mental illnesses, including PTSD, generalized anxiety, and a few other things I won't get into.
I'm bipolar. It's a long list.
So just to let you guys know, the way I usually run these things is we'll kind of get the conversation started a little bit, and then I'm looking for questions from you guys, input from you guys. So just, be kind to one another, raise your hand. I will call on you, just don't interrupt, and let us know if you have specific questions or just thoughts in general that you would like us to talk about. So since we are dealing with this, mental illnesses and whatnot in literature, what are some characters that you guys can think of, whether it's because you identify with them or just they are the first ones who pop into your mind when somebody asks you about characters that suffer from mental illness?
I know for me, Katniss Everdeen and Peter Millard from The Hunger Games. Honestly, everybody from The Hunger Games. Eleven and Will from Stranger Things, specifically. I was just looking at other things. And that's, and I guess by proxy, Liv Moore from My Zombie as well.
Yeah, I think Katniss and Peeta are probably the ones that I think about the most when I think about PTSD symptoms. And in my own writing, my characters I wrote a sci-fi trilogy, and the characters in the sci-fi trilogy do experience traumatic events, and the main character after that does suffer some dissociation and some anxiety around the PTSD from that experience. So, and full disclosure, I also have generalized anxiety disorder, depression, and PTSD from some experiences as well. So, and so I feel like in my own writing that a lot of those things that I experience I put into those characters that have experienced traumatic events in that trilogy, and then also in another urban fantasy that I've written.
Do you think that it is easier, or that it just shows better in your writing or in other authors' writing if they have actually experienced these things versus just doing research on them? Like, do you think there's probably a visible difference there in terms of how well it is portrayed?
I think there's an you guys know what I'm trying to say. Authenticity to someone that is writing from their own experience.
Yeah.
And I know that not all PTSD is the same. A lot of people experience time lapses, memory loss after the traumatic event as well. So the PTSD is not one size fits all. PTSD comes in many forms. It could be a trigger, anxiety, shaking, or it could just be complete dissociation. And I think that everybody who's, that if you have not experienced that, then there will not be that genuine connection to the character who's experienced the traumatic event.
Oh, to be honest, the first time I read Hunger Games was well before I dealt with anything that gave me PTSD. So, like reading it then and then like reading it again after the fact, like it hit me like real hard, like right there, that like, wow, I can. When I was reading it the first time, it was sad. Like, of course, this girl feels this way, and she went through these horrible things, but like it's a different experience when you actually like, like, oh gosh, yeah, that now I understand, like really understand.
Yeah, we may not have killed a bunch of children, we have fights to the death for Corley and Snow, but also Finnick Odair is a really good one as well. Joanna Mason too. Finnick especially, because there's a lot of despondence there. Joanna is more of a, complete denial dissociation. And I know that they also touch on the Morphlings. I don't know how many of y'all have actually read The Hunger Games, but the Morphlings, basically they hid until everybody else died in the Hunger Games, and then they self-medicated with Morphling, which is essentially morphine, just a strong painkiller, and they became addicted to it, and it ruined their lives. Haymitch is another one too. He drinks to excess. He pretends he doesn't care about anything. So I think that a lot of these characters, and especially with the Hunger Games, it always comes to my mind. But those are some characters who have definitely experienced it, and they all show different signs of the PTSD and the anxiety and the depression from the events that they've gone through.
I was in a clinical supervision with my supervisor before DragonCon, and I was talking to her about this panel and how I was excited to be on this panel, and we were talking a little bit about it, and she got really excited and leaned over to me and went, "Oh my God, think of the substance use."
Yeah. I'm a big, strong protagonist. I drink all the time. I'm in the apocalypse. I got some news for you, my guy.
And like I said, if anybody has any thoughts or characters or anything that you'd want us to discuss, please just raise your hand. We can talk at you for an hour, but that's not as fun. And I guess like my thing is like I read a lot, and but it's hard to like Hunger Games comes to mind like immediately. I mean, you mentioned some Stranger Things, which technically this is supposed to be mental illness in literature, but
it's a book now, so it's fine. It's fine now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, iZombie is a comic book. Walking Dead also
by proxy, because she eats the brains of people who have experienced traumatic events, and so she in turn experiences that traumatic event. And it does impact her. So that's kind of a nice third-person narrative that they took there with that.
Yeah. And they do it fairly well most of the time, too.
Definitely, for sure. There's a lot of heavy stuff.
Yeah. A lot of funny ones, too.
Yeah. I'm working on a character. One of my main characters finds out at the end of the story that everything he believed in is completely wrong. He's been living sort of in an alternate reality. It just blows his mind. And he has these issues that are going to lead into the next book. So along the lines of what you're saying as far as, all these things that people are dealing with, the heaviness of this, do you find in any of your characters or characters that you read about that these can become positive things in their future. So yeah, they have this horrible disaster that happens to them, you know, and they have all these mental issues, but eventually they work through them and move on, and maybe it creates an opportunity for something wonderful to happen. Or do most of the things we're talking about here kind of stick down into a dark and dire world?
I mean, I think it can go either way. It can absolutely go either way. I mean, and this is not even this isn't from something I read. This is from personal experience. When I was younger, I felt like the idea of mental illness was a weakness. Like I was raised in a very conservative home, and so growing up and realizing that that's not the case, and then realizing, well, crap, like I'm actually struggling with these things, and this is all I'm talking years and years and years ago that I went, you know, through this sort of like self-realization. Like I still struggle with, you know, mental illness stuff, but like I feel like I am a better person, and that I am happier, you know, even with the bad times, I'm happier with my life the way it is now. Like, and I would not be in this place had I not gone through those struggles. So like it can take a lot to get to that point, but yeah, I mean, absolutely at the end of a story, like it's possible and not, you know, I don't think it's too like happy ending-ish for somebody to be able to overcome. Now, I don't think mental illness just goes away, but there's a difference between like just the constant struggle and reaching a point where, hey, like I'm okay, you know, at least for right now. Like I've reached this point, and I might still have depression, I might still have PTSD, but I can, you know, kind of be happy with my life.
It's kind of the difference between surviving and thriving. So, and as the writer of this character, you have the opportunity to have a hopeful ending if you would like, and you know, your character is still going to have symptoms of their mental illness, and they're going to you know, be manifest in different ways. And then it's up to, you know, that character and you as the writer to determine how you want to manage that, if they're going to manage that, if they're going to... I put my characters in therapy at the end of the trilogy because I knew that that's what they would need to be able to have a hopeful ending for them. But that, again, like it's up to you as the writer if you want to have a hopeful ending for that individual. And there's something to be said about for folks that were seeking representation for individuals that are managing their mental illnesses to have those types of stories, to see the struggle, but then have the hope at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So one of the issues I'm having with this film and the cinema that starts off with writing is mental illness or a person with mental illness as a perpetrator of violence. Whereas the data shows that us with mental illness do not usually portray acts of violence. And something that comes to mind just coming up, like the movie The Joker, whereas he's a violent person because of his mental illness or a trauma that leads to mental illness. And I think one of the things people as writers have a duty, so to speak, as you all touched upon, is mental illness as a growth process for the individual and how they positively react to it and build upon it.
Yeah. I mean, Becca, did you want to? You look like you wanted to say something.
I always say that mental illness is it explains it, but it doesn't excuse it. So, you know, a character suffering from mental illness. Yes, you have the Joker, who people romanticize, who is an absolutely reprehensible character. There's nothing romantic about him at all. You know, mental illness should never be romanticized. And people like to do that. And in literature, they like the manic pixie dream girl who needs to be saved. They like, you know, the sad boy who needs redemption. And I'm tired of people romanticizing that mental illness in order to get people through a relationship or to fix them. But sorry, yeah, that's just my like with the whole Joker thing. You know, like. Yeah.
Well, bringing it back to the idea that like people with mental illness are going to be like the perpetrators of violence. I mean, no, I get why you went there, because the Joker, that's just an entirely other story. But I mean, yeah, and I think like a lot of that comes from just, I mean, honestly, I don't know the people who have written these, characters like that, but I can't imagine. I personally can't imagine writing a character and being like, this bad guy has PTSD and also is going to go around murdering everybody. Like, and you're right. Like, it's in real life, that's actually not the way it is. People with mental illness are like rarely the ones who are going on these sprees. So,
and that's why it's so important to have positive representation, because for every Joker, we need to have a positive representation of someone, because if that's all anyone sees is, oh wow, that Joker, mentally ill and killing folks, that's what mentally ill people do. It's really easy to equate that when you don't have the other positive representations in media.
Going back to your don't romanticize mental illness, are there any other hard don'ts you have for writing characters with mental illness?
Oh, hard don'ts? I would say not. I would be careful of saying the word cure and having a relationship cure them. I've seen that a lot, and that's not a positive, I guess, stereotype or representation.
You are not your mental illness. You are just you.
yeah,
Exactly. Yes.
And people who sit down and type-rate you as that illness, blah 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 blah, can kiss mine.
yeah. I mean, I like, again, like the don't the good don't that we already were discussing even before the romanticization. I can't talk to it. It's Sunday. It is Sunday of Dragon Con, y'all. Don't romanticize it. Don't make just the automatic. The mentally ill character is going to be the violent one. They're really a cure. There's no such thing as a cure, but sure as hell isn't going to be a relationship or a love story.
Don't use mental illness as a personality quirk.
Yes, like the whole manic pixie thing.
Girl, back to that, do not use it as a personality trait. Just somebody that makes somebody cute and endearing, and it goes back to the romanticizing. Like I deal with some really deep demons, and I have some friends who do as well, and they are typecast as manic pixie dream girls, and they hate it. Because we're more than our mental illnesses, and it's especially with the women, with female characters who are. Who have the manic pixie dream girl. There are some manic pixie dream boys as well, but yeah, that's definitely a hard don't turn it into a personality. Don't turn it into like this.
They're more than that.
They're more than
They're
that.
more than
exactly
the collection
what
of their symptoms.
She's had her hand up.
Yeah.
So would you say that a good literature trait would be perseverance? Like, I know for mental illness, having mental illness myself, one of the things that has always pushed me through it is you have to persevere, you have to push past it, and you always go to be a better person. Like mental illnesses, yes, you struggle with them, but they can also push you to be more understanding and sympathetic, empathetic.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. No, that's like, you're right. I do think that, I don't want to say like, oh, you have to have experienced these things in order to, be a good person. Like honestly, I would hate for everybody to have to go through some of the things that I've dealt with. But like, but yeah, the idea of perseverance is definitely. I mean, and honestly, it kind of comes back to there's no cure. You're not gonna your mental illness is not just gonna disappear. But yeah, if you stick things through and I mean get help, and persevere, then yeah.
I think perseverance is one of the better traits that come from mental illness. not just mental illness. I mean, obviously you can have it otherwise, but one of my favorite traits in a character is perseverance, because a lot of characters suffer some hard things during their storylines, and perseverance is just a big trait that there wouldn't be a story if they died at the end.
And I think perseverance is a great trait for someone to have, but I also just want to remind everybody that, folks relapse. Folks have harder times. They can be getting better and then go back and then get better again, and it's okay to fail. It's okay to be kind to yourself. So if you're, and I think for writing as being an author, that sometimes, folks are like, you've got to write every day and you've got to push yourself to get those words in and you've got to work really hard to get that novel done. And sometimes I don't want to, because I don't feel good, or I have too much anxiety about a scene I want to write, and it's hard for me, and so I have to be kind to myself and go, okay, today is not going to be a 2,000 word day. It's going to be a 5-word day. And that's okay.
I mean, shoot, honestly, I've had months that were 0-word months.
I've
month
had
after
some of
month
those
after
recently
month.
too.
2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is a slight pivot. It's more related to storylines in which people are collectively experiencing a trauma, and I'm referring to a specific book of mine that just comes to mind. It's an older novel, if anybody's read it. It's called On the Beach by Neville Shute. It's like a classic, nuclear bomb kind of situation. And I think that it's really relevant for this topic because it covers a variety of ways that people deal with impending death. So it's pretty tragic. It's not a feel-good novel, but it's really compassionate and beautifully done. And it showcases a variety of expressions of how people respond. And some of them were things I could anticipate. So some of them were people choose to just be in denial and just go about life as usual. Some people go into substance abuse, like you mentioned, to just numb themselves through the experience. And one of the expressions that I didn't expect was just recklessness. There's a whole scene in there where people are just completely flippant with their lives and totally reckless. And there's this crazy scene that I will not spoil for you. But the recklessness is something that I just thought I'd throw out there too.
And it kind of in that vein, you're talking about the recklessness. The 100, and I would love to talk more about the 100 because there's so many characters that deal with different mental illnesses. There's one character in particular, which I'm trying not to spoil right now, but Jasper. And he's lost everything, and he is ready to die, and he is just doing every single thing in his power to die. And his friends keep pulling him back from the edge, but he is just completely, he has no self-preservation instincts at all. So I totally understand what you're talking about.
Jasper's a really good example. I completely forgot about him, but he is a really good example of, like she said, just he reached a point to where he decided that he was just kind of done, and everything he could throw himself into, he did.
And all of his, everybody says that he's a coward. By the way, that he achieved his ends and everything like that. And I think that it's really dangerous. It's also really common, a very common theme that people who choose to end their own life are cowards, and that is not it at all. And I think that they address that pretty well in the 100, but the 100 is an excellent example of multiple traumas, and it's just, it's an excellent show. It really is very great, but it has a great example of dealing with guilt and PTSD and watching everybody you love die, watching your enemies die, your friends die, almost being killed, being captured, tortured. There's a lot in there, and the actors from the 100 are very vocal about mental health and positivity with mental health as well. I know Bob Morley, who plays Bellamy, has very severe depression. He calls it the black dog, and which is what Winston Churchill called his depression as well. And I know also that Lindsay Morgan, who plays Raven Reyes, she also is very outspoken about mental health, and she's a mental health advocate as well.
Oh, and P.S. also, the 100 is based on books, so we're not totally off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I did think of two others while we were talking. Characters is Klaus from the Umbrella Academy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then Lucas from the Haunting at Hill House. Is that the name of that Netflix show? Yeah, those were two that. Once I mentioned substance use, I was like, oh yeah, Klaus.
That was truly heartbreaking. Klaus
Yeah.
was just.
He is my favorite too. I enjoy him a lot.
Yes, yeah.
Do you have any tips for writing about people in leadership roles with mental illness that might think that they need to put their mental illness to the side to help everyone else first? Like any tips in how to write?
I mean,
Tara and I know nothing about
speaking
this
from
at
personal
all.
experience. I mean, the thing is, like, and it depends on somebody's personality. That is actually the type of person I am. Like, I set aside my needs, and honestly, like I run a convention. I run a Game of Thrones Song of Ice and Fire convention, and just because I do that, there's no off switch in terms of my insanely busy life, and when you're in like a position of power. Putting that in quotes because I don't really like to think of my position as that, but like when you're in a leadership position or a position of power, you need to be able to like people need to be able to take time for themselves, but you can't always. So,
and it might not. I mean, this is kind of tangential, but I'm a mom. That's a lot of responsibility right there. And
I was thinking along with like being a mom, you kind of have to.
Yeah, you have to compartmentalize sometimes and be like, oh my God, I don't want to drive to this freaking dance recital, but I'm going to because my daughter's in it and she's a little ballerina and I'm going to go watch. And you know, and after you do that though, you know, you got to take some time for yourself. So in writing that, I would just suggest that, you know, you can have your leader do what they need to do, but also recognize that it might be difficult for them. There might be some symptom management that has to come after. And then always, you know, if you can, I'm a huge advocate of self-care. So if they have a like ritual for their self-care or whatever that they do after, that would be a great something to incorporate into the narrative.
And it's, you know, self-care is not always a bubble bath. Sometimes self-care is literally crying and crying and crying and crying because it releases, you know, the buildup of, you know, all the pain,
all the stress,
and also like thinking about the leadership roles, especially in literature. I know that Clark from the 100 is one of those characters who, even though she's battling her own demons, she automatically always sets those aside, but they always come back to bite her in the butt. But yeah, and I mean, and I've seen Tara, like, and I help with the convention, I've seen Tara completely just, my knees just, like, so I've seen it in action, and it's, people in charge need love too.
And they need to give themselves love sometimes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I have two things. Like you, I was raised in a very conservative environment, so anytime I came forward with anything relating to mental illness, I was told, oh, you're just a teenager, or, oh, you're making it up, blah, blah, blah. So do you think it's important to kind of include more mental illness in these books for people like me that are reading these books and you're like, oh, okay, so this is legitimate and that, you know, I should maybe look into it more? And do you think there's ways to incorporate people in books seeking out other ways? Because I feel like most of the books you read now, someone has a mental illness, they get all strong, they're like, oh, I figured this out all on my own. But like, let's be honest, like, I don't know of a lot of people that can figure it out on their own.
I mean, yes, no, it's absolutely important to have that, like, this representation. I mean, really any sort of diverse representation in literature is A++. But yeah, it's for it to be portrayed and to be portrayed with either from experience or with the proper research. And, you know, like FT mentioned earlier, the idea of like there, and you're saying it again, you're not just going to get better forever and everything's perfect and everything's fine. necessarily, usually, almost always. So the idea of like portraying a relapse is, I think, would be a really, really, and I can't think of anything where they show that. I mean, like bringing it back to Hunger Games, just because it's the easiest one to talk about. Like, at the end of the story, like Katniss and Peeta are married and they have a kid, right?
Yeah,
or kids, and like, which she never wanted or whatever. And it's like, but I'm pretty sure, and it's been a while since I've read it, but I'm pretty sure there's also like a, you know, hey, things aren't perfect. Like,
she still has nightmares,
yeah.
and she still wakes up screaming, but Peeta is always there to hold her. And he also has his nightmares as well.
Yeah, so but it's a very brief, like, you know, kind of mentioned in passing thing, and I think it's like we're supposed to focus on the fact that they're married and have children and are living fine lives and everything.
But she does very specifically say that things are still hard.
Yeah.
And you know, so it's kind of a bittersweet ending. You know, she has to live with both of them have to live with what they did and what happened. You know, what she says, they're much worse games to play. So, you know, she's going to struggle with those demons, but, you know, she and Peeta are going to be helping each other along with love and empathy.
And I think it's an important point that you know, your characters can have allies, that they're going to be there for them, and that can, you know, be the person they go to, and talk with, and you know, be a positive person in their lives, because, you know, y'all said that growing up that you might not have had that person, and I think having a person in fiction and having a representation of that person that's a safe space would actually, you know, for your readers, they may be able to go then seek out their own safe space.
As long as the safe space in the book is not someone who is just 100% perfect, good, and, you know, it needs to be somebody who's real with struggles of their own, person. Because, you know, you cannot find, you know, a perfect person to hang on to, because then that goes back to the romanticizing and the fixing and the so you need to find, you know, a safe space person with real flaws. Like, for example, like Tara's one of my safe spaces. She and I have been friends for a long time. You know, if I am having a bad day, I know I can always go to Tara and she can always come to me. But yeah.
But we're both like, we both clearly have our flaws.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and the other thing is, yeah, I see. The other thing is, like, I think it's hard, especially in post-apocalyptic literature specifically. Like, it's going to be hard maybe to write like an actual like a therapist in necessarily, but like, you know, a good mentor character can work as you know, in that sort of therapist role, and if it's done right, either from experience or from proper research. Definitely be very careful, like, especially if you are trying to write about something that you personally have not struggled with. Find people to talk to who have dealt with it. You know, read not just wikis, you know, like go read some really like in-depth articles or novels where, you know, these characters are dealing with similar things that you're trying to portray, because like, just be very, very careful if you're writing something that you personally have not struggled with, because you know, it's very easy to do something, like to do it wrong, honestly. Yes, we had a question in the back.
So I've had like a fair amount of experience with like almost like writing as a form of therapy with, you know, putting both like I do it, like there are people who've got it varying levels of success, and they kind of help process through what they're going through is like by putting facets and different facets of myself in characters, and I do this a lot unconsciously. And then it's only like later when I look back and I'm like, oh, yes. And so I was kind of wondering, like to a certain extent, I've always kind of thought that, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it's a very, it's like a thin line, because you don't want to, especially if it's not just your own personal writing, you know, if you're writing for an audience, like it's hard to, like, I'm just like what's a good way to balance, like, being able to do that without making it like, so here, audience, this is all of my problems. Investing in characters, have fun. What's a good way to like have that balance?
It probably has some distance between yourself and the manuscript. You can write what you want and then go back and edit it. Maybe take a month or 2 months or whatever between those two things. I actually have a lot of experience with that. I was writing this sci-fi trilogy, and I wrote the first book, and then after the first book, I had an accident where an individual grabbed my arm and they tore all the cartilage in my wrist, and then I had to go have surgery. And then I had to write this second book under a deadline with one hand, and had some PTSD symptoms after that. And then so this character ended up experiencing everything I was experiencing at that time. And the anger over the situation and the sadness and the pain. I mean, all of it was in there. And sent it off under the deadline, got it in, sent it off, and my editor came back and was like, whoa. Can we dial it back a little? And I had to rewrite the first 3 chapters because I didn't give myself enough time and enough distance between it. And I was lucky that my editors understood that and were great to work with me. But they did come back and they were like, we really need you to rewrite these first 3 chapters because it's you're starting off really heavy. And and it was also a craft issue because there was nowhere for the character to go. So my recommendation would be just to make sure that you give yourself enough time to do a really good edit and beta read and do that before you start submitting it anywhere.
Well, I mean, and also, like, as writers, we put ourselves into our characters a little bit no matter what. I think. I can write some secondary characters for sure that don't have any sort of anything that has to do with me or my personality, but especially like main characters, and especially if they're women, it's really hard to not put any of yourself into a character. There's exercises you can do as well if you're trying to nip it in the bud and not do it from the start. List things about yourself and just literally make a list and post it at your desk. Do not put this in this character. This character doesn't need to have this sort of this exact sort of relationship just because I did. And it not just looks it's the personality stuff is the hardest because sometimes it depends on how self-aware you as a person are too. There are things that your friends might see in you that you don't see in yourself, but you might insert them into a character anyway, So and that's where good beta readers and stuff come in as well. But yeah, honestly, make a list of the things, both things you like and don't like about yourself, and in a do not write, and just put it somewhere so that you can glance at it once in a while and make sure that you're not just writing yourself as a character again. I thought I saw another hand up, but maybe I'm seeing things. Did anybody? Yes.
So I had a question because you guys were talking about substance abuse a minute ago. And I think one of the more famous examples in literature of substance abuse with both positive and negative effects would be the use of spice and doom, where a lot of people, it's definitely portrayed as people take this and it has these wonderful side effects, but it's also horrible for this entire planet and you might end up swallowing a giant vat of it one day. And what's your opinion kind of on, I guess, both substance abuse and other mental illnesses being portrayed in both positive and negative ways?
Well, I think the biggest thing is, and of course, Dune being sci-fi, it's not it's not realistic in any way, so I think it's a little easier to sort of write off the abuse of the spice than it is in with Haymitch in Hunger Games or Klaus in Umbrella Academy, where you had to be very, very careful not to portray it as, again, a quirky personality trait, oh, her, this person drinks a lot, they're funny when they're drunk, and that's all that it is, and we're never, I think it's important to face the fact that there's, it might be funny at first, but eventually it does become abuse. It's problematic.
No, whenever you're just saying that, there's a group on Facebook, it's a tag group, and it says, sounds like romanticized alcoholism, but okay. It's not cute, it's not funny, you know. I have friends who are severe alcoholics, and it's ruined their lives. I've had friends who are, you know, who've died because of opiates. Like, you know, it's rough. It's very rough, and, you know, like, yeah, the spice is wonderful, you know, in that regard, and, but I feel like that creating something similar to spice that does not have any, like, negative kind of side effects is still an abuse, and it's still self-medicating through something like that. You know, like, it's not like if you, like, go running, you know, as a form of, I guess you could be addicted to running, Tara. But I think there's a dangerous line between using substance abuse positively. But yeah, no, you're right though. Doom is not.
Well, I mean, and that's again, like, that's the issue. Like, when you have, like, oh, I've got this thing, this drug, this food, whatever, you know, that makes me feel better about myself, like, and maybe there's not that many bad side effects, but it's still, like, you really be careful with the idea of, like, self-medicating, and not proper self-medication where you're taking a prescribed medication that is actually helping you. Yes.
Do you think, now that you mentioned the prescribed medicine, do you think there's a way, like, because this panel is usually post-apocalyptic, do you think there's a way to address characters who had access to that and then don't, and they have to deal with that?
Honestly, that is, like, probably one of my worst nightmares is the idea that, like, we could actually end up in a post-apocalyptic society and I would not be able to get the proper medication. Like, not because I would do anything bad or whatever, but because the way I exist happens because I take medication on a daily basis.
And there is actually an example of that in, it's The Walking Dead, but I don't think it's in the comics. It may just be in the show with Mika and Lizzie. And which one is the one that's crazy?
Mika, the older one, I think.
The older one? Okay, well, she has bipolar disorder, and she's undiagnosed. She's, you know, she had medicine, but she was not able to take it, and she just is like a murdering little crazy person. So I think that's kind of an example.
I think that when you think about those kinds of things, you would have to also think about the medical side. Like, okay, if no one has access to pharmacies, how are people going to get their insulin? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Antibiotics, you know, all that other kind of life-saving medicine that folks use on the daily. And that's the same for any kind of, drug that's prescribed for symptoms of mental illness. So you could think along the medical model of that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, also, like, there's a lot of ways you could go with that, because there's the idea of, like, withdrawal from certain medications. Like, yeah. Not all of these medications, like, not all the medications that people take for different mental illnesses have really bad withdrawal side effects. But I've been on a couple that did, like, really.
And there's definitely some that you have to step down. That you know, if you want to come off of it, you have to go from 20 mm-hmm. to 10 to 5.
Xanax is one of those things. That
Celexa, citalopram, those kinds of SSRIs, those kinds of things.
Yeah. Yes.
So, sort of a recommendation based on that, if anyone knows the novel Fiend by Peter Svensson, it's less to do directly with mental illness than it is very explicitly with addiction. Because it's about the two central characters are people who are addicted to methamphetamines, and a zombie apocalypse happens.
Oh wow!
And what do they do? Like, what are for these two particular humans? How do their priorities change? And how do they, like, navigate this world where the entire world's falling apart, but they're still addicted, so they're still, like, trying to.
And it's shocking to me, actually, that there's not more. That it's hard to think up of examples of this, like people having to deal, like there's always that storyline of, like, oh, well, somebody's sick or somebody got hurt and we need antibiotics, but what about everything else? Like, what about insulin is something that I'm sorry, but people would die like very soon because they could not get insulin. But I mean, shoot, honestly, I'm like almost legally blind without my contacts. Like I have glasses I can wear, but like that's like, I mean, that too, and there's not, I feel like there is a sort of a missing chunk of post-apocalyptic literature where it's like people actually having to deal with these little things that like I sure as heck think about them. Like I think about how much I miss pizza and coffee, but I'd miss my contacts and my medications more, I think. Yes.
Going kind of with that, you have coping mechanisms that you have in the main, like now, but it's post-apocalyptic. Some post-apocalyptic people grew up in it in some transition. So kind of going back to, we're used to medications. There's, is it important to write in for characters who were before whatever end event happened, transitioning their coping mechanisms to how they deal with that, aka they have impulse control issues and they just murder people, but they have different things that go on with that, on how you evolve the coping mechanisms. Do you break down, or do you find something that brings you up? Those people that go from being leaders to scum, you could be president and then you could be nothing, and then vice versa, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, honestly, The Walking Dead and I'm trying to focus on comics more just because, literature. There's definitely, I think, some of that in like The Walking Dead. I don't know, what do you guys like, characters with like coping mechanisms that evolve?
Well, I mean, are you talking like generational? Like these people were alive during the event, and then there was a generation that came after that.
Well, that's just an example, because there's some people that never knew a time before, so their coping mechanisms are different, and then you have ones that they relied on antidepressants and everything, and then they had to not. So you had to learn. There are coping mechanisms that can help with that, but it's
humans are incredibly resilient. The human brain is incredibly resilient, and I was doing some research before this panel that statistically, children that are under 10 years old that experience a traumatic event don't develop symptoms of PTSD. Because children are really resilient. And I think there is something to be said of generational trauma. But I actually don't have an example of that that I can think of, y'all.
Generational trauma.
What I was just saying is your coping skills would have to adjust based on the situation that you were in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I think that it probably I'm thinking of I keep thinking of The Walking Dead, like
Morgan?
Well, I mean, no, even like the kids in Walking Dead. Was it Fear the Walking Dead recently? Like there's kids who were so little at the beginning of the whole zombie apocalypse thing that like you see the way like they're living their lives versus like maybe the kids who are a couple years older who had like they remember that they remember like at least a little bit of life. And so I think like The Walking Dead does do that a little bit, but yeah, you're right. Like the idea of like somebody who has never known. I mean, honestly, like look at like real life. This isn't coping mechanisms or whatever, but look at like me. I grew up. We didn't have internet in my house until I was like 16 or so, 15, 16, and I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't have a cell phone in high school. I didn't have one for most of college. The one I did have for the end part of college was. There was no texting. You had like 100 minutes a year or something, you know what I mean? Like versus, someone 10 years younger than me who has literally never known life without the internet and the world at their fingertips. And the way that there different ways of thinking because of that, different ways of living your life because of that. And so I think that there's ways to kind of look at that. And it's obviously like, that's, I think there's ways to look at like real life situations that are happening right now and say, okay, well, this is how different people think just because of this one thing, because this person had internet their entire life and this person didn't. And I think there's ways to work that into, to figure out like coping mechanisms or whatever. I'm babbling right now, I think.
I did have one of those phones in college too. You could literally dial 911 and that's all you could do with it. And they were like this big.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, you just said you were babbling, but what you said sparked an idea in me. Is the idea that, like, okay, what if the culture and the somehow sort of feeds into mental illness, and then like a post-apocalyptic situation creates a window for something else to happen? So someone starts the story with a mental illness and finds a different way of like building synapses towards something different, you know?
Yeah.
Without like writing in wind, it's like nullifying the validity
Mm-hmm.
of mental illness, but like, I don't know, when you're not plugged into screens all the time and you're like, hey, okay, there's something else here.
It's like I had a point that I was going to make, and then I like lost it halfway through my like babbling. So no, but yeah, no, I like that idea. Like again, like you want to be really careful not to act like this is some sort of cure or whatever. But no, I the idea of the synapses firing differently, I like very especially. Yes, you have a question.
Going off of that, I have bipolar disorder, and my psychiatrist was talking about how probably in other time periods, I might have been able to seem more normal and get along better because the culture that you're in, the expectations and what you have to do to get by are different. So in certain cultures and certain times, I might have had some things that were more beneficial. The extra energy might have been beneficial and things like that. So I think depending on what kind of post-apocalypse you're in, there might be some ways that having mental illness would give you some advantages and some drawbacks.
And I've actually thought about that a little bit too, that, being hyper vigilant in the middle of a zombie apocalypse is probably a good idea.
Yeah. Or, in any kind of like, complete government collapse, being paranoid, not trusting anybody. Don't trust anybody. Especially the government.
I imagine that ADHD would probably be a good one to have during like a zombie apocalypse type situation as well.
I can multitask and I can do menial tasks. I can build multiple gunpowder. In the very, very back, she had her hand up.
Yes.
We have a couple of examples in real life of generational trauma, such as the Great Depression, where society did pretty much collapse. And I don't know about any of you guys, but like my great-grandparents and my grandparents who lived through it have a few quirks in their personality that we don't think of as PTSD. They're like, they saved everything. Every little plastic cottage cheese container was washed out and kept. Every yogurt container was washed out and kept. Every tiny little bit of like rope or anything, they kept it because you never know. It could be useful at some point. And my grandparents, like, they didn't trust banks. Money was secreted in different parts of the house. It was not deposited in banks because just kind of little things that we don't really think of as PTSD, but the later generation is going, what are you thinking? And not really understanding where that comes from. But the other one would be the Holocaust.
Right.
Yeah.
That's true too.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And honestly, like that actually might be, if you're looking for like little research things in terms of like, oh, you want to write something post-apocalyptic and you want to like look back at traumatic events and the way people, acted and reacted during and after them in real life. And I think that could be a good research, option.
There was a really good There was a really good conversation about that in Glow, in the last season of Glow, that just came out about generational trauma in the Holocaust. Coming out of a wrestling show about the gorgeous ladies of wrestling, but there was a really good conversation about that in there.
Yes, yeah.
So, just going back to the ADHD zombie apocalypse. Because I have ADHD and my bag got lost a couple of days ago. So this is day 2 without my medication, and I can assure you with 100% certainty that by this point I'd have been killed by the zombie.
I guess it depends on the way on the way it manifests itself. You know, like I know some people with ADHD, they're it's like the lack of focus. Like for me, it's hyper focusing. So. And again, that just goes back to the idea like everybody's mental illness is different. Really, like there's no pretty package mental illness that you can say I have this and mine. My bipolar is the same exact as your bipolar. Like people are just inherently different, obviously, and so there's no stock mental illness.
And it does, like I was talking about hypervigilance, which is something that comes out of PTSD, and it just means that your cortisol levels are higher, and you have a tendency to go into fight, flight, or freeze quicker than other folks. And if you freeze, you're dead in a zombie apocalypse. So it really does depend on how that manifests. Do you fight? Do you run? Or do you freeze up and get eaten?
Yes, you have a question.
What's your feeling then about having the D on the end of PTSD, that it's disorder instead of just PTS, post-traumatic stress response? Do you think that changes it to have it labeled as disorder, or just have more of people have PTS and that's a normal human reaction to stressful events or traumatic events?
I mean, I'm not a doctor by any means, so I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there would be weird connotations or something to removing the D in PTSD, but
I feel like the PTSD denotes something more chronic as well. So I think that keeping the D there is important. And another thing I wanted to say really, really quick, you were talking about the don'ts with like don't do this with the PTSD thing. Assault, especially towards women, is used as a plot device for PTSD for women to rise above. Stop doing that. Stop it, please. There's more. A woman can, have a mental illness without having been, sexually assaulted. But I just wanted to yell that before I forgot.
Yeah, PTSD comes from a lot of things.
Yeah,
a lot of things. A car accident. Is one just very benign
or
example.
Somebody die in front of you, or
yes.
And I'm a mental health practitioner. And so what I wanted to include on that is part of the reason that they add the disorder to it is not so much because it's something that you can't move through, but for billing purposes. To be able to help our, no, seriously.
No, that's a real thing. Billing.
To help clients, having that disorder on the end allows us to be able to help them and get them the help that they need. So even though it is more really just post-traumatic stress and the responses that are coming from it, they just slap the disorder on the end of it because whoever decided it was a good idea to put it together as such, slap disorder on the end.
Y'all don't know how much of mental health treatment and even medical treatment boils down to billing codes.
Yes.
It's really interesting if you ever want to look up some really weird ICD-10 codes. There's things like hit in the face with a goose. It's a real code. So there's some really wild ones out there.
Bit by alligator.
Yeah, they're
assaulted with traffic code.
All right. Well, we have reached the end of our hour, but on that note, thank you guys so much for coming. This was a great discussion. You were a great audience. Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your Dragon Con. Thank you for listening to Tara Lynn's A Geek Saga podcast. If you like what you heard, please check out my website, ageeksaga.com, or consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/ageeksaga.